Alrighty, we are getting ready to get started here. I am working on admitting everyone here to the session, and I would love it if anybody, what we're going to try to use as far as communication during this session for the most part is the group chat. If you're able to access that on your device, I'm going to say hello on the chat. We're probably going to have more people on here, and then we'll be able to really do video or kind of some of the participation like we have in the past, just to keep it focused. So let's communicate through the chat if y'all don't mind that. That's the pros and cons of having a big group. Looks like we'll have a big group this time. We're up to 21 and rising right now. When we have our smaller coaching sessions and stuff for the academy or other things that we've done, we can normally have everybody say hello, and I can see your faces, but you'll just get to see mine this time. So hello from Allison, Australia. It's awesome. Betsy Gray, welcome. Good to see you. William, good to see you as well. Wonderful to have everyone on here. I've been looking forward to doing this for a while. Just as a check here, if somebody could tell me in the chat how the audio is working. Can you hear me well? Just want to make sure that's working before I keep going. Okay, great. Sounding good. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to try to keep paying attention to admitting people into the waiting room as we get started here. But I'm just so glad to be able to spend this time with you guys. I know I've gotten requests from several of you to do an online training like this for those of you who can't come to the in-person trainings. So I'm excited to be able to connect with some of you guys. I know it's going to be challenging because we can't do everything that I normally do in a live session, but I've been just trying to pray about what is it in particular that God wants me to give you guys during this session. It's amazing that we have this technology to be able to communicate and share with you guys. And I think one of the things that the Lord's just kind of laid on my heart for focus for these sessions is really I just want to make this not so much just lecture. I want it to be a little more, kind of like if you were in my living room and we were having a training here at my place. And so the goal in this is not necessarily to try to just go over tons of information. We have information that you can look at, resources I can give you later. My biggest goal in this is to really be able to give y'all vision, inspiration, really focus on the heart, and thinking through training strategy and how y'all can kind of get past the sticking points of what it takes to actually go and teach somebody. And I really want you to go away feeling like you understand the Wellwater Garden Training Manual and how to actually use that as a resource for the people that you might want to train in your area. Let's see. So as I'm experimenting with this first online kind of training, we'll just see how it goes, and hopefully God will teach us some through it. I had kind of the layout of each of the lessons and how we were going to go through those, each of the sessions. But if the Lord changes that as we're going through, we'll be open to that. I just want to hear what God wants me to share with you guys and be able to pass that on. So great to see a lot of the rest of you joining. Corbin, Bishop, great to see you. The Carters, Will Russell, great to see you. Everybody else, Janet Pye, Kay, great. Got people all over the country, all over the world. Great to have everyone on here. Okay, so the overview of this, of the 4 sessions that we're going to have. This first session, my main goal in it is to kind of do some introduction, a little bit of myself, a little bit of vision casting for what the Well Water Garden Project is and how it kind of came about, because I want you guys to kind of have a vision for the story behind this and where it came from. A lot of what I cover today is covered in the first 3 lessons of the Well Water Garden Handbook. But today I'm just going to kind of do it in a PowerPoint presentation, kind of inspirational way. And as we go through, we'll start going through the lessons in the actual handbook and kind of looking through those later this evening. And y'all will be able to, we'll be able to refer back to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about in this first session. So we'll do some introductions, share a bit of vision this time, and do hopefully some Q&A in the chat down here at the end before we run out of time. Then this evening, a little bit later, any of y'all that are able to join us in a few hours after this one finishes, we're going to be going right into the handbook and kind of how that's laid out, how you can use the lessons, and going through the first few lessons in there. And what I want to do is not so much just go through all the content of the lessons, because you can read that later, but I want to talk through how you would think about each lesson in the flow and how you would use that in a class that you might be doing or that you might share with somebody, so that it's not just, you know, content and chapters, but it's like, okay, well, here's the purpose of this particular lesson. Because sometimes you're using a lesson, you know, just 1 or 2 lessons combined to do a class for a particular group of people. And I want you to really understand my thought process behind why I designed it the way I did, so that it's a more useful tool. The actual specifics of how to do things and stuff, I don't want to use up all our time in that, even though we'll go through some of those for sure and share some pictures about what things look like when you're doing it and the hands-on stuff, some, but that's what we'll do this evening later. And then tomorrow morning, we're going to really, at 8 o'clock my time, we'll go through a lot of the lessons on all the practical stuff. How do you actually put in a well water garden? What's the hands-on things involved, and what are the lessons that you can use to do those? And then our last session tomorrow at 10 o'clock, I think it is, we're just going to focus on the last lesson and talking about the how to teach others and how to actually pass this on to others in a way that helps you share the love of Jesus with them in an organic way. So somebody said, where is access to the workbook referred to? The Well Water Garden Handbook is available at wellwatergardenproject.org. It's also, there's some links to it on the Redeeming the Dirt Academy. If you're on that, if you're not, then you can go to wellwatergardenproject.org and you can see that. So let's see here. I am going to post that in the chat really fast. www.wellwatergardenproject.org. And there's a form there that you can download that. If not, you probably have my email if you're on this call, and feel free to shoot me an email and I'll just respond back and attach it. And you can get that as it's a free PDF that you can print. Whoops, let me see here. I accidentally sent that directly to you, Mr. Carter. Let me do that to everyone. All right. Okay, there we go to everyone. Okie dokie. Well, let's go ahead and get started here. What I would love to do to start with is really just start with a little bit of worship and just kind of prayer time. You know, because the goal I've been praying is, I've been getting ready to start this, that the result, like in these sessions that we have, that it's really for me in my own heart, like all about Jesus, all about lifting him up, all about what we can experience of him through these things, that you go away more in love with Jesus, and not so much just listening to what I'm saying and what I'm recommending, but being like, what is God telling me through what Noah is saying? That's what I want you going away with, even if it's something different than what I'm sharing, right? Because that's the heart that we really want to have in this, as we are going through it, is, what are you telling me, Lord? How can I be more obedient? What's this? What things are you putting on my heart as we listen to this? We're trying to make easy step-by-step things, but this is not a formula. These are just a tool to be able to apply a particular heart that we want to have. And that's the heart that I want you to be using when you bring it to other people, that you're concerned about. what does Jesus think about what I'm doing? Not to what the people that I'm sharing with, what do they think about it, but is he pleased with me? What does he want from this? What does he want for them? That's the heart that I want from, in my own heart, and then for you guys as well. So I'm going to read a scripture. And I love, actually, we love to do music when we have people here. I'm not going to bring up my guitar right now, but I thought we would just sing, or I'll sing if you don't know the first verse, just the first verse, because for sake of time, of "Be Thou My Vision," because we really want to have God's vision, to see what He sees in gardening, in our communities, and the needs, not just what we see. And so I'm going to read, first of all, a verse. 1 Corinthians 3:11, which is kind of our foundational verse with a lot of this stuff. And then we'll sing "Be Thou My Vision," and then I'll open us with prayer and we'll get right into it. So 1 Corinthians 3:11 says, "For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ." And this doesn't just apply to our spiritual, like the spiritual side of our life that we think of, because all of life God cares about. All of life is only going to be fruitful, is only going to be solid if we're building it on Jesus. So this training, we're going to be talking a lot about how we build on the heart of Jesus. That's how we do that. We talk about his humility, his faithfulness, his unselfishness. And the idea is that we will keep saying, how does what I do reflect the truth of the gospel? The fact that the story is the world it was created by a wonderful creator. It's broken because of our rebellion against him. Jesus made a way to be restored to that creator if we turn from doing things our way and trust in his payment and his plan for our lives. And then we have a hope for all of eternity. And that hope starts today, not just when we die. And we can begin to live in light of that. That's what we want to be talking about, building even our gardens on, where that's what the story we're living in light of. And so this verse, "For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ," is what we want to remember. And we want to remember that if we can change, you can change things, you can garden in lots of different ways, but if it's not overflowing out of that heart of Christ and that desire to be obedient and love him, then the fruit in it long term is not going to be really anything lasting. So that's our verse. And then let's sing the first verse of "Be Thou My Vision." And if you don't know it, you can look it up. It's a great song, old hymn. "Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me save that thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night. Waking or sleeping, thy presence my life." Lord, we just thank you so much for this opportunity. And I just pray for this session now as I go through and share things, Lord, hopefully that's some of your heart, that what the Holy Spirit wants to speak would come through me. We just pray that you would prepare our hearts, Lord God, to receive and to hear what it is you want us to through this time together. I just thank you for each and every one of these precious people here. Thank you for the technology that we're able to do this in this day and age. There's a lot of evils that are done through the power of technology, but we thank you that through that you provide ways for good things like this. It doesn't replace our in-face relationships for sure, but it definitely is a way that you're being able to spread truth and connect people around the world. So thank you for that. Please bless the technical stuff. Lord, help that to work well. Guide and direct me as I share. And I just pray that you would give me a heart of humility, a heart to serve and love, and that you would just it not be about how well I'm able to cover things or present stuff, but just that it would be you just speaking through me because you choose to, for the sake of the people that are here and that are listening, and that would multiply out into many people impacted, Lord, as a result. And we just thank you for the fact that you care about us, that you love us, and that you're going to hold our hand each step of the way, Lord, as we go trying to follow you out of love for what you've done for us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, guys. Well, let us go ahead. I'd like to hear a little bit more from you guys down in the chat if you're able to do that. If you could type in the chat. Somebody said, yes, asked about attending all the sessions, though I'm recording this. Thankfully, Lord, help me to remember to push the button. I'm recording this, so we will post these in order for you to be able to watch them or share them, hopefully with somebody else later. But we've got people from South Africa. Go ahead and share with me in the chat, if you can, where you're coming from, where you're joining from. I'd love to hear. We got Missouri. We've got, I know we've had Africa. We have Georgia, Oklahoma, Kentucky, California, Wisconsin, North Idaho. Woo! Yeah, cold up there. Tennessee, Australia. Awesome. Florida, Colorado. Let's see, Renee, Virginia, Canada. Yeah, for you people way down south, it's warm right now, but up here, man, we're pretty cold in the U.S. Florida, Virginia, Cape Town. I'm coming to Cape Town, Jurgen, in a couple weeks for the Foundation Summit, so looking forward to being there for the first time. Awesome. Yep. Texas, originally from Zimbabwe. Awesome. Well, I tell you what's so encouraging is so much of what I see in terms of the movement of people that are interested in connecting faith and farming, in not just using farming or gardening as a way to like get an in to share the gospel, but also like letting the gospel and the truths of the scripture and our worldview transform the very way we do agriculture. Just the people that are interested in that, it's something God's doing all over the place, right? It's something God's doing in people's hearts all over the world. And so I just encourage you guys, y'all are part of something that God is doing. And it needs to be, so keep pressing on, keep being faithful with the steps that he's telling you to take, because there's need confirmation when you see him laying the same things on the hearts of people all over the world, not just in in one particular area because of one particular church or something like that. So that's always really encouraging to me. The Spirit is the same all over the world, and God is not a God of disorder. He's a God of consistency, and he's moving. And so that's why I'm excited about gardening and stuff right now. I just want to be a part of what God is doing at the moment. I wanted to show y'all something. Speaking of, we're going to talk about some, different gardening methods than maybe some of y'all are used to, that we're trying to just have based in the simple childlike approach of God knows more about farming than I do. And Jesus said, I only do what I see my Father doing. So how can we just look with faith and apply some of the things that we see our Father doing in nature? And I live in Alabama with red clay. And a lot of people say you can't grow very much here, but we put in one of my oldest son planted some fall crops earlier a few months ago with in some of our well-watered garden beds, no till, right into red clay with compost and mulch. And before we got on the call here, I went out and picked this. This is you can hear him squeaking. A beautiful cabbage that had no plowing, no chemical fertilizers, and so it's just a healthy, happy cabbage. And we got to pick all these guys before we get the really cold weather. But it's amazing. You go and you see just this abundance. I mean, this time of year, it's hard to even get out there and pick it all. And I think a big part of my heart in this well-watered garden project is I'm like, God's creation is so abundant, so generous, even in its broken state, that it's just grieves me when I hear people, starving, right? Especially where they're in places where they're surrounded with natural resources, that if they understood and they were able to have that heart that was able to approach it as a steward, that God could just add to them, and that they wouldn't have to, they would be able to enjoy some of that abundance that God can provide through the land. But I just wanted to show you that cabbage. Hopefully that's, thank you for the compliments from some of you there. Okay, so I'm going to hopefully be still on the chat. What I'm going to do next is go through a PowerPoint presentation that kind of covers some of the stuff in the first session. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to go through a little bit the heart and vision behind the Well Water Garden project. All right, cool with you guys? Let me get this up. All right. Okay, can y'all see that? Can you see that? Okay, good. All right, well, I'm going to just try to go through this without being too in-depth because I want to leave some time for questions and answers at the end, but I'll just trust the Lord to direct me as we go through it. So we want to talk about the heart and the vision behind the Well Water Garden project. And for me, this has been just a journey of seeking to redeem the dirt. So a little bit about me. I am a disciple of Jesus, husband, father, a farmer, homesteader, an author, educator, and I work as a U.S. coordinator for Foundations for Farming. And this is our family minus one that we had. We have another little guy that was born in June, so he's not in that photo. But yeah, we're just so blessed to be able to have just the opportunity to do ministry as a family together. And we really love farming, but we love Jesus more than we love farming. Let's see here. Everybody could make sure, I'm trying to look, that you are muted. That way we don't get an echo of me back. I'm going to make sure if I can, some people. Let's see. Yep. Yeah, if everybody could just make sure they're muted, that'd be great. Thanks. And we're excited about agriculture because it's a way that we get to experience Jesus and share Jesus with other people. We love the farming for sure, but it's like he's the one that brings it alive for us. And I think for those of us that are Christians in agriculture, there's several problems, that we face as we want to do this for the Lord. Is first of all, how do we address the practical challenge that we face in agriculture and food production? I mean, it sounds romantic, but once you get out there and you start doing it, you face with it ain't as easy as you think. And then as Christians, how we don't want to do anything in life that isn't part of serving Jesus, right? So it's got to be connected somehow. So how do we do that practically? Especially if we're all by ourselves in the garden weeding garlic, how is that impacting the world, right? But it does if it's done, properly, and that's what we have to understand how that works, because it's a good question people sometimes challenge me in. How do we make an eternal impact through agriculture and food? One of the things that I was thinking about a few years ago is that I want to be a Christian farmer, not just a farmer who happens to be a Christian. That's one of those things that, sometimes our vocation is so much our identity, in our cultures, but as Christians, our identity is Christ, and that should define what we do. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. That's what I want. I want my farm and the rest of my life to look different from what it was before, or or a while ago walking with Jesus. It should be transforming me, and that when people see stuff, I can point back, yep, Jesus is the one that's making that different, that's changing me. So we want to talk about in this session, kind of the heart is trying to address that topic of how do we integrate faith in farming for practical solutions and eternal impact. How do we allow what we believe to impact what we do so that it provides practical solutions to the challenges we face in gardening so that we can then share those with others, and also where they can see Jesus in us? That's what we really want. So a little bit about my farming journey. I was always interested in working with my hands. I was home educated by my parents and really loved that. They really did a great job discipling me, and that was a big part of why I wanted to do that with my own family. But I got into small-scale farming because I really wanted that to be not only a way to make a living that I felt like was a way I could engage with the Lord and his creation, but also disciple my family and reach out and impact our community. I wanted it just to be an expression of loving God and loving my neighbor. And so my dad and I actually went together on his land. He bought some land and we built a house, and then I started a farm. And it was just a real adventure. We started off with a market garden, and then we did some free range chickens. These are laying hens here that we moved around in kind of an Eggmobile style, like Joel Salatin. We had some meat birds that we'd raised out on our pasture. That was a super fun thing there when I would let them out of the pens, and then you bring the food and they all like run after you, this big tidal wave of chickens. And then we sold directly to our customers at farmers markets, and then eventually through kind of like a custom CSA. But we had so many gospel conversations and opportunities to just, talk to people and build relationships through our farmers market. And we just loved all of those. We miss those people because we don't do that anymore right now. My brothers had some fun opportunities on the farm as well. There's lots of cool lifestyle things, riding pigs, having your own little pet turkeys that are super inquisitive. And I think a lot of us are attracted to agriculture because there's things that God's done about it that express Him and help us to experience part of Him. It's enjoyable. It can be enjoyable work. We can get fresh food, work as a family, work together multi-generationally, have a nice place to work outdoors. And then there's just that God-given itch to grow. And that's a big part of, I think, what draws a lot of us to it. And we really enjoyed over the years, my wife and I working together. Here's all our sugar snap peas that we were harvesting. Just, the kids in the rain, just having a lot of fun with the things that we produced, all our eggs that we would collect and letting the chickens go out and free range, processing those together. We call our disassembly line, and the kids get all good at their different parts of it. And selling again produce at the farmer's market, having different scales that we're growing greens and other things. Yep, that was some of our first gardens down on our creek bottom. And yeah, just these were some of the produce things that we were able to sell to our customers, which was just such a rewarding thing to be able to go from seed to those vegetables, and to actually see the people that were eating them. Very, very rewarding and a real blessing for us. But when I was first starting, because the Lord had really drawn me to Himself at a young age and given me a passion to just serve Him all out, like 100%. I was like interested in how do I live out my faith in my farm? And in some sense, there's a lot of times where we're just like, oh, well, if you're just a moral person while you're doing something, then that's how you're a Christian, right? You just don't steal, you live with high degree of character. But in farming, there was this controversy. If I was a successful conventional farmer, like they were teaching at the college down the road, people were like, you're an evil person because you use chemicals and put chickens in big houses, And then if I was a successful, like small scale organic farm, like go that route, other people are like, you can't feed the world. So if you ask, what's the best way to grow a tomato plant, you get a lot of controversy. And so I was like, okay, well, what does God think about all this? How I realized all these people were trying to reflect their value system, how they viewed life, how they viewed, what right and wrong in the way that they approached dealing with life in agriculture. And that's, I think, why agriculture is a more controversial topic, because it deals with life. And when you deal with life, there's a moral dimension that's different than when you just have a craft where you deal with wood or metal, right? And so I wanted to say, well, if their worldview, like elevating science or nature is like the source of all of our answers, impacts the way that they farm, neither camp really, industrial or conventional agriculture, acknowledges God. So I'd be like, how do I reflect what I believe? Because I saw, you had these extremes on both ends that really nobody fits into perfectly, but kind of the strains of thought. Extreme environmental agriculture, focuses on sustainability, but sometimes a lot of the methods are questionably productive. And some of the extreme industrial agriculture, very productive, but questionably sustainable, and a lot of times negative impacts. And I saw like there were good things to learn from both. A lot of good management things, like just systems that industrial agriculture brings, and a lot of people that are really good at that. But then some of the manipulation of nature felt like it really didn't appreciate God's design there as much. But on the other hand, the people that did appreciate God's design, like the people in permaculture and stuff, often were God haters who, were very new agey and didn't want anything to do with Christianity. And so that's where I just began to say, well, does God care about farming? Does he care about how we do this? And what's neat is God can, I believe God can show farmers the way to farm. There's actually this verse in Isaiah that says, when a farmer plows for planting, does he plow continually? Does he keep on breaking up and harrowing the soil? His God instructs him and teaches him the right way. And all this also comes from the Lord Almighty, wonderful in counsel and magnificent in wisdom. So this is an indication here that there are right ways, better ways, like God's ways of doing things that he'll actually teach us. He's not going to force it on us, but he's there to show us even the right way to, prepare the soil here. And it comes from him, even if it's just an idea he brings to mind. But I think he has more for us often than we get because we just don't acknowledge that he's there to ask. And I think a lot of the what we are looking for, or what God calls us to, is always this balance. We have sustainability, productivity, or conservation and productivity. And what God called Adam in the garden at the very beginning was to care for and work the land, where you're balancing, you're keeping this tension between resiliency and output, care and work, sustainability or conservation and productivity. Both are important, but I think God makes us have to maintain that tension because it requires us to go to him to ask for how to apply it. There's not just a formula. It'd be a formula if it was one or the other. But if you got to have both, you need God to ask to show you how to apply that in your particular circumstance. So I ended up writing a book, Born Again Dirt, Farming to the Glory of God, that some of you may have read. And I just raised some of the questions challenging Christians to think about what a biblical worldview might impact in terms of how we approach agriculture. But it just raised a lot of questions, not a whole lot of answers in that book because I was still early in my farming journey. And through researching that book, I became familiar with Foundations for Farming out of Zimbabwe, Africa. It was formerly known as Farming God's Way, and it's still operated under that name for some of the people that are doing this. And so it was some of the few people in the world that were connecting faith and agriculture in a way that was really discipleship. And I saw the crops, and I'm like, whoa, man, if my farm can look like that, this is amazing. They've got some of the most amazing agriculture I've seen. And when I would listen to their farming conference talks, it was more about Jesus than even Jesus conferences I'd gone to, So that was like, man, I need to go learn from these people. And so I just shared now I'm going to share the story of Foundations for Farming and the guy that started it, Brian Oldreive. And this will give you a little bit. This is actually one of the lessons, the story of the Well Water Garden handbook, or the Well Water Garden. It's I think lesson 3 in there talks about the story of Brian Oldreive, because we share Brian Oldreive's story not necessarily because he's a super person, even though he is one of those guys that God's used in an amazing way, but his testimony and story illustrates and is a way to teach a lot of the principles, because it's through his story that God's revealed a lot of these things that we ended up applying in the Well Water Garden. It's a great way. It's way better to teach principles and things through a story than it is just listing a bullet point, right? So if you can learn to share Brian's story, it can be a really great way to tell people, oh, what's this about? Well, let me share where it came from here. So Brian Oldreive is a farmer who farmed in Zimbabwe. He grew up there, and his family they were not farmers, but when he was young, he got set up in the tobacco industry by a gentleman that helped him. And he was very successful at growing tobacco. This was early in the 70s. And Zimbabwe, as some of you know, some of you from Zimbabwe, had kind of a colonial era, and then they had a bush war for a period of time. And then they had a kind of a communist government since around 1980. And so he was a tobacco farmer in the early days and during that Bush War. And then he ended up coming to know the Lord around 1978. He was, like a lot of people, went to church but didn't actually know Jesus. And he and his wife got radically saved and realized that there's this relationship with Jesus just made their whole life come alive. And but it's interesting because he grew tobacco, but he had always been against smoking, which is personally, he thought it was a bad habit and was always teaching his kids, don't smoke, don't smoke. And one day one of his daughters called him out on it, and he ended up, he just realized that later he woke up in the morning, couldn't sleep, or woke up in the middle of the night, couldn't sleep, and his Bible reading for that day was 1 Corinthians 10:31, whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. And he was convicted that he was living this kind of double standard where on one hand, he said he believed these things, but his life is reflecting something different. Kind of like, it's easy to have God in one area of our life that we let him speak to, and then we have our other area where it's like we do our own thing. And part of that's just, maturing and understanding how Jesus can be king in our life. But he ended up choosing to go and grow food. Promised God he would never grow any more tobacco, and he and his wife together started growing foodstuffs, corn, wheat, soybeans, but they had several terrible crop losses, and ended up having to decide between going back to grow tobacco or lose everything. And by God's grace, they decided to stick to their convictions, and they ended up losing everything, and was humbled. And he would say, God he can't use a proud person. Sometimes we don't even know we're proud, right? A lot of times we don't. And it's only through humiliation that we gain that humility. And God wanted to use him. And so he ended up losing everything, went and got work at another farm that was also losing money. And he began to just question what they were doing in their stewardship of the land. Their mechanical costs were rising while their yields were declining. Their soil and water and seed were being washed away after they would deeply plow these fields. And he was just like, surely, like, there's a better way that God has. And so he ended up going to creation after he read 1 Corinthians 1:20, where it says that, God's eternal attributes and divine nature are clearly seen, being understood through what has been made. And so he said, well, what can I learn from what God's done? I mean, God's plants grow beautifully and big every year without all the plowing and fertilizing that I'm doing on my farm. And so he just went and with childlike faith just sat down in the woods or the bush and said, God, show me how you grow things. And from that time, God revealed to him two simple principles. One is that there's no regular deep inversion plowing in nature like he was doing. I mean, there's soil disturbance to a degree, but through birds and animals disrupting it and those kind of things. But there wasn't that deep inversion plowing. And there was always a blanket on the surface of some kind of organic material. So in faith, he just went back and applied those two principles on his farm. And it's interesting because later they ended up looking and doing an experiment, a simulated storm trial at an experimental station where they applied, and I'm sorry for you metric people, I converted this to US measurements, but 2.5 inches of rain, 30 minutes on a 4% slope. And they had two different plots. One was plowed like normal, as you can see, this one is with a little plow on it, and had no mulch. So then they measured the runoff. 90% of that 2.5 inches of rain ran off, which means they only got 1/4 of an inch infiltrated down into the ground. And they had over 12 tons of topsoil per acre lost through that. And it cost, money to plow it to do that. Contrast that with the plot that was not plowed, had the nice root system and all the horizons of organic matter and stuff in there, and the minerals underneath. And when that was applied, y'all think, what do you think percent came off? It was, let me click here. Let me see if I can get it. There we go. Only 6%. Only 6% ran off, which is amazing. And that means 94% infiltrated. And there was less than 1,000 pounds of topsoil lost per acre. Now, when you get 2.5 inches of rain in 30 minutes, I mean, you're going to lose something because that's a huge rain. But it was almost nothing compared to the 12 tons that was lost through with the other. And just realizing like the beauty, I mean, again, a lot of these methods we're going to talk about, it's not about saying, oh, you're sinning if you do it a certain way, but it's just saying, are we appreciating the amazing design of God's creation, and how much are we hurting ourselves when we ignore it, right? And we think we're actually doing things our way. So he discovered that, and he ended up applying that principle of starting small at a high standard and increasing slowly, maintaining the same high standard. It took him 6 years. They started with 5 acres or 2 hectares of what they were growing, even though they were growing about 8,000 acres or 2,000 hectares, or no, 1,000 hectares, sorry. And yeah, 1,000 hectares, about 2,500 acres originally. So he got permission to do a little plot on one part of the farm. And that little plot, they got such a good yield that year. They got the average in Africa right now is under 1 ton per hectare. And they got over 10 tons per hectare, about 20 tons off those 2 hectares. So anyways, it's just a really good yield. The interesting thing, though, is even though they were the rest of like 90% of the farm that they had under their traditional cultivation, God blessed the season such that they made a profit that year for the first time, which is interesting because it's this idea like it shouldn't, like he was only doing 2 out of the 1,000 hectares with these principles. But God looks at what we were faithful with little with, right? And even though he couldn't implement it over the whole farm all at once, do you think he would have succeeded if he had tried to? Probably not. So even as some of you are thinking about some of these things you learn, don't change everything all at once. Try it on a little place. Learn it on a small scale first. God will see that. And you can see here, they gradually increased from 5 acres to 120 acres to 240 to 500. And eventually, after 5 years, they had the whole about 2,500 acres under that. And then God blessed them where they were so profitable, they were able to sell, they were able to buy out a lot of the other farms around them and were the second largest privately owned farm in Africa at the peak of their production. And just on here, here's for you hectare people, some of the hectares on here. And but it shows you here some of the average like yield increases, 4.5 to 9.5 tons a hectare. Those increased, but also their cost decreased from like 75 liters of fuel per hectare to only 15, and needing less tractors. And I don't want to bore you with all these numbers, but I just want to show you just applying 2 simple principles that he saw in nature had this big of an impact on the farm that they were doing. So for us bushel people, the production increased from 71 to 150 bushels to the acre, which was pretty good. And for the amount of inputs they were putting in back then, very profitable. Soy and wheat as well increased, and their fuel consumption went down and their tractor needs. So that's, your profit. If your income goes up, your yield goes up, and your costs go down, that's a really good recipe for profit. Before, their costs were going up and their yields were going down. And whenever we have like a decrease like that, profit is just an indicator to help us understand how faithful we're being. So it's a good, when we see those profit falling, it's like, okay, God, how can I be a better manager? Because it's like an altimeter, on a plane. We should pay attention to it and pull up if it's showing us these kind of things. So just again, the takeaway is God's ways are best. God's the best farmer. We need to follow his ways by having the humility to acknowledge that he knows best, give up our agendas, and follow him wholeheartedly. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding, and in all your ways acknowledge me, and he will direct your paths. And what was neat is then God gave Brian really a heart to take some of these same things he had learned on a large scale and to teach the poor. And they found that there was a lot of success that they could have, even just with a hoe, still applying these 2 same simple method principles that they saw in creation. Just to show you some comparisons here, we have conventional crops compared to a no plowing crop there. This is one of my favorite ones. This is, if you can see, they're only applying one of the principles. There's not even any mulch out there. But because they didn't plow, on the right-hand side, more of that water infiltrated. So when they had a dry spell, those plants still grew. And again, even though we teach a minimal tillage approach on this, I want y'all to understand that this is simply a way to illustrate and contrast our ways of approaching things with the wisdom of God. So that's what I want you to take away from this, is how amazing is God's ways. What a difference it can make, even if we just apply one simple thing, because he did it in creation. So another thing that they began to teach is also management, 4 management principles, because you can have all the techniques right, but if you don't have the right management, you're not going to be faithful and you're still going to lose money. And these principles, on time, to a high standard, with minimal waste and with joy, just reflect who God is, right? He's a God of timeliness. He's a God of excellence. He's a God that doesn't throw away broken things. He makes them new. He doesn't waste stuff. And he's also a God that adds joy. So we want to reflect who he is in our management. And if we do those things coupled with his wisdom in creation, then it can have a huge impact. So I was blessed to be able to go in 2013 to learn from the guys of Foundations, to meet Brian, and really was encouraged. But I really felt like the Lord was telling me at that point in time, I want you to take this back to the U.S. and apply this heart that you've seen here with the problems that you are facing back in the U.S. And again, the foundation of Foundations for Farming is Jesus, going back to that 1 Corinthians 3:11 verse that we were talking about. And we do that practically, because you can just say that, but what does that mean? We build and we trace everything back to, how does this reflect humility? How does this reflect faithfulness? How does this reflect unselfishness? You're going to hear that over and over and over again in these sessions, because everything's going to trace back to these. This is what Jesus modeled when he came. He humbled himself. He was faithful to what his Father told him to do, and he generously gave himself unselfishly to die for us. So we've been blessed to be able to begin to implement some of these Foundations for Farming things on our farm. We had a conference and became the first U.S. training station, and have been able to serve as the U.S. coordinator here. And we really have a desire to see God use Foundations for Farming to help make disciples in the U.S. and also to give the U.S. something that's worth, taking to other parts of the world with all the missionaries that we send other places, And then when we began to apply it on our farm, it was just amazing to see. Again, Alabama red clay can do this kind of stuff without plowing. When you see, because I eventually was being challenged with vegetable production with some of the techniques we were using, because my soil was getting poorer because I wasn't doing this. Sometimes I don't know as much as I think I do. And it's the older you get, the more you realize that, right? But to see, when you come and apply these principles of doing things with excellence, of doing things well, and in a way that it's not how much you do, but it's how well you do it. It's amazing. We made more money and grew more vegetables on less land than I really, had ever been able to before. And then we began to share that and teach that to other people. Our farm in 2020, we had a 1/4 acre market garden. We had 52 beds that were 40 feet or 12 meters long. We had a couple Caterpillar tunnels or hoop houses. We sold baked goods, a few products from some other people, and chickens. And then we were doing a custom CSA, being able to work completely as a family with no hired help, training other people, and just from the farm doing a $40,000 to $50,000 gross with a very good profit margin, because we had almost no overhead because it was such a small operation. We were able to do it with the kids, deliver to our customers, and we just really were blessed by that. We ended up then at the beginning of 2022, though, especially with all the kids we have and everything we have going on, I realized either we would kind of answer the call to teach more people how to grow their own food and to train others, or we would run our farm. But we couldn't do both at the same time. And after 10 years, and we had finally kind of built the farm that we had always dreamed, the farm business, we ended up shutting that down for the time being, and so we could just focus on the training. But it was a blessing, because it's, we were able to shut it down and give it up in a sense when it was everything we'd always hoped it would be, rather than because we were failing at it. But that was just an amazing season. So now let's talk a little bit about the impact of farming on faith. So when we're talking about to Christians, they should be like, what in the world does agriculture have to do with Christianity? Why should we should just go share the gospel with people? But we should care about agriculture as Christians. First of all, we all participate in an agricultural act, which is eating, right? So it does impact us. And we've got to be faithful with the first thing God entrusted to us, which is the land, economically, right? We do want to go on to other things, but if we're not faithful to that first, we don't really have the freedom to do other things. And it does, because of that, affect the viability of every other kingdom enterprise. And there's a lot of ministries around the world now that are interested in equipping their workers, whether they're church planting or whatever, to have some agricultural skills so that they're a little more independent or sustainable in the areas that they're working in. So what does farming have to do with the gospel? And here's just one way that I have found helpful that is not original to me, but some people in the development world, community development world use this. It's the idea of the relationship gospel. So if we're telling the gospel from this perspective, the idea is God created man in the beginning with 4 primary relationships. The relationship of man with God, relationship of man with himself, who he was, his identity. And again, I mean mankind, like people, not just, guys. And then our relationship with others, our relationships with them, our relationship with creation. And all this is basically all of life, right? It is one of those things that no matter what we're doing, we're either engaging on the spiritual level in who we are, identity, our relationship with others, or with creation. When we rebelled against God, and that broke that relationship, because this good God had all this good for us. We said, nope, we got it apart from you. Well, we get separated from that source of good, and we become the evil then, which is the opposite. So that broke all these relationships. It resulted in shame in our relationship with ourselves, blame and pain, and with others in creation. And so we often talk about when we in the church, how Christ gives us identity and how that helps with this broken relationship here, and then how he helps us to love others unconditionally. But we don't often talk about, this broken relationship with creation that also is a result of the curse. Our dirt needs redeeming in a sense. Agriculture needs the principles of the gospel applied to it. We talk about creation was subjected to frustration, not by its own choice, but by the will of the one who subjected it, in hope that the creation itself will be liberated from its bondage to decay and brought into the freedom and the glory of the children of God. So there's this element of brokenness that's going to be transformed. That's going to be part of this redemption that Jesus brings. So I think we're probably all familiar with different challenges facing agriculture, on the home production side. Like, even though it's attractive, a lot of people are interested in it, very few people actually garden or grow their own food compared to what they used to. And people quickly go from like excited to overwhelmed because they don't realize how much of a learning curve it often is if you've never done it before. And historically, it's been easier to buy it than it is to grow it yourself. For commercial agriculture, there's challenges, at least in the US, and I'm sure other parts of the world as well, where there's low farm income. The production is not as sustainable as it used to be due to, all the inputs that we don't grow on the farm anymore. There's safety of inputs that affect people's health and farmers' health at times. Government intervention through regulations and subsidies and all that skews all the economics of it. So it's a challenging field to be in. As you can see here, like most of agricultural households in the US, most of the income comes from people in the family that have other off-farm jobs, which is just the sad truth that we're subsidizing our farm operations by off-farm jobs. There's aging farmers, and that's quite a big thing. A lot of our farming population is getting older. A lot of young people some are interested, but they're just, how do they get into it, right? And then the stresses of large-scale production models and debt and all that means that the suicide rates among a lot of commercial farmers is very, very high right now, which is just a real challenge, a real tragedy. Here's kind of some talking about showing how the average age of the farmer has gone from 50 to 58. Here, I also heard that a farmer friend of mine recently told me that at least here where I am in Alabama, we're using 4 times the fertilizer application rates that we did a few decades ago just to get the same yield. So, all this is just an indication to say, is agriculture healthy? Is it thriving, or does it need, right, some restoration? Or we need to go to God to say for solutions. And I think, yeah, we see there's some problems. There's a lot other problems nowadays that we face as well with a lot of newer things that have come about recently. But I think we need to understand that the root of all this brokenness that we see ultimately is a reflection of this broken relationship with God. And we, like these extreme industrial agriculture comes and says, hey, we got solutions, mankind and science can fix it. And then the extreme environmental agriculture is like, nature can save us. And as long as we get rid of enough people, then everything will be fine. And neither one of these, whenever you have a godless solution, it always ends in death, loss of freedom, all those kind of things, even if it's not evil at the face of it. And unfortunately, a lot of Christians in agriculture don't even see the battle going on here. Does that make sense? We're just kind of oblivious to it. So we end up sometimes taking advice or methods from people that don't share our values at all, just because we don't recognize how important that is. So as farmers, we're going to have to decide who we're going to ultimately trust, God or man. And this is why when we say that Jesus is the solution, it's not just a theoretical like hashtag we're putting on our Christian farming, but unless we fix this relationship to God through Jesus, we can't hope to fix any of these other relationships. Does that make sense? That's why he really is the basis of us actually being able to have hope in seeing healing in this relationship with creation. And that's why I would say Christian agriculture requires a relationship, not a method. This is not like, well, what's the Christian way to farm? Well, once we do that, it becomes legalism, and you don't need Jesus to do it, right? Because it's just a method that you do. So God is more interested in why we're doing it. And when we think about how do we glorify God through anything, including farming, John 15 says, this is to my Father's glory that you bear much fruit. And if we want to bear fruit, John 15 also says we've got to abide in Christ. So it's that relationship with him that ends up producing that fruit. Jesus said, very truly, I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. It's amazing. It wasn't that Jesus was going out and saying, I'm going to do all these cool things and ask my Father to bless it. He was like, nope, I'm at your disposal. Only going to do what you tell me to do. Only going to say what you tell me to say. That's a whole different approach, right? Than saying like, I'm farming to the glory of God. Like I'm doing my own thing, but saying it's for you, God. You know, that's not what he's looking for. He's looking for wipe the slate, wipe the whiteboard clean and be like, where do we start? What do we do? Where can I start with where I'm at and move towards where you want us to go? We glorify God through obedience. And I would just say Christian agriculture should be less about bringing glory to God through what we accomplish and more about letting God glorify himself through our obedience, which requires a relationship and faith, and is evidenced more by growth than by like where we are at, right? I may be here, you may be here. Jesus calls us to here. So let's unify around the direction that he's calling us to. And then founding on the foundation of Jesus. But how do we practically do that? So the parable of the sower talks about, the kingdom of God and it bearing fruit. And some brought a harvest and some didn't. And without going into all the different types of soil there, the difference was the soil, right? Which reflected what? The heart. So real kingdom fruit in agriculture comes from us having a proper heart. Let's see. So what we're off, the thing is we can have all the right methods, all the right information. We have information to like access to so much information today, right? More than a lot of other people in the past. But if we're doing stuff in pride, in unfaithfulness, in selfishness, then it's not going to bear a good fruit in the end of the day, even if it looks good temporarily. So that's where we want to focus on. How do we start with Jesus' heart? His humility, faithfulness, and unselfishness. And what I would say is that Christian agriculture should aim, because we're never going to get there perfectly, aim to be a visible expression of the heart of Jesus. So a garden or field reflects the heart of the gardener or the farmer who tends it. Neither legalism, where you just follow a set of rules, nor license, where we're like, we can do whatever we want to. Neither one of those communicates the gospel. The gospel, what the gospel is that we've been saved, but now we are serving him. We are obeying him. And it's not this rules-based thing, but it's this heart-based action that requires a relationship. Neither legalism nor license requires a relationship. You can either do whatever you want or follow a set of rules without Jesus. But when you have that relationship and you're asking how to reflect that where you are right now in your context, that's what he's looking for. So the practical impact of humility on agriculture, just the way we're going to talk about it here at the Wildwater Garden Project, is if we have humility and we understand we don't know everything, then we want to then say, acknowledge God's wiser than we are. As a result, we want to look to how he's designed things. And then it actually results in, like we saw with Brian, amazing improved methods. It solves some of these problems that we're facing in agriculture. Faithfulness. When you start with what you have and you do things on time at standard with minimal waste, God adds profit with joy. When you're faithful with little, he adds to you. And a lot of farming today is not very profitable, but faithfulness is a way that we can position ourselves so that God will invest in us, add to it. It's not a prosperity gospel thing, but it's just what God says: if you're faithful with little, he will add to you. And then unselfishness. That's why prosperity gospel is trying to be faithful but selfish at the same time, right? You have to have humility, faithfulness, and unselfishness all in balance, you know. And unselfishness is both like we want to be unselfish in our generosity to the land, to leave it better than we found it, and reflect the owner of it, who's God, and generous to others and the poor. And then I think we'll see God bless our harvest, because he says, as you measure, it'll be measured to you. And also then our relationships as we love other people. So this idea that all these problems we have, no new farmers, unprofitable methods, unsustainable methods, like all these things, I believe in just seeing these small little things that there's great potential for these heart elements to be what are the foundation of seeing change in those areas. So humility, production improves, results in that. Faithfulness results in profit and joy. Unselfishness results in new farmers. And these are just little things, like and examples, right? They do a lot more than that, but these are just examples of that relate to what we're talking about. So the Well-Watered Garden Project, for many years, I was applying a lot of these things, but didn't actually have a tool to like implement them, right? It was just generally implementing them on my farm. And I had, especially around 2020, with all the shutdowns, people were like, how can I do some of this stuff? Do you have a resource? And so we ended up, amazing like story how God like lays something on your heart, and then I'm praying about it, and then he ends up sending a hailstorm that destroys most of our crops on our vegetable farm for the week. So I don't have to make any deliveries. So I ended up writing the first version of the Well-Watered Garden Handbook, and then over the years, what we've been able to teach this, which is basically a simple, productive garden that enables anyone to grow their own food while glorifying God and sharing the hope of Jesus with others. So it's a training tool that's to demonstrate this heart of humility, faithfulness, and unselfishness. The well-watered garden part refers to the term well-watered garden in Isaiah 58, which talks about those who spend themselves on behalf of the hungry and satisfy the needs of the oppressed will be like a well-watered garden. So we're not talking about the way we irrigate it. We're talking about the intention through this garden, the heart of having a heart for the last, least, and the lost, where we're planting this garden, but it's not really about me. I'm modeling here hope for others. That's why we try to plant it in a visible place that people can see if possible. And this, I'm just trying to also be faithful to apply what we've received from Foundations for Farming and Brian Oldreive, because this concept came from him, this idea of rather than going and telling people what to do or helping one farmer in a community, which makes everybody else jealous, you set up a demonstration plot in a shining place in the community so that people see it, then they want to come and ask, and then you can share with them, right? And you're not beating it over their head, but it just is this beacon of hope. And part of the vision we have is to see 1 million well-watered gardens in 10 years, which would be 2030. It's our agenda 2030, I guess. But with this idea of simple multiplication, and you could have 1 million well-watered gardens in 10 years if each person that planted one would pray that God would bring along 2 people you could train each year or share with that could plant their own, and then teach them to also pass that on. So it means that we don't have to be full-time, but we can make in training, but we can make an impact in spreading not only the knowledge of how to grow food, but the hope of Jesus at the same time. And a well-watered garden is a tool that even if you're sharing with people, it's a tool for the church to share with other people in the church and people outside the church, and then your faith is the testimony part, but it's not like they have to have that to apply it, you can share it and they can benefit from it as well, which gives an ability for you to show that service and show that love of Jesus to them. So we have the free handbook at wellwateredgardenproject.org, and the Well-Watered Garden displays these humility, faithfulness, and unselfishness in these ways. Like we're going to do low tech to showcase God's design and creation to demonstrate humility. We want it to be a visually beautiful example so that it demonstrates these high standards. that it's a model to offer hope and share with others, where it's a demonstration of unselfishness. It's managed by a champion who shares the vision, because a garden is just a reflection of a gardener. Like, a lot of people think, oh, I want a garden. Well, you need a gardener, and then you'll have a garden, right? You can't just have a garden without a gardener. So we're investing in gardeners, not just gardens. And then we talked about the million well-watered gardens. So this is what, when we talk about just the tool that we've developed here that's based on some of these that we've learned from Zimbabwe, is we have this 6 meter, 6 meter, or 20 foot by 20 foot plot, which is big enough to look visually impressive, like as a demonstration, but it's small enough you could put it in a lot of different places. You can also do them smaller. I mean, you can apply these same principles in a little bitty raised bed or a pot, but this is kind of the standard well-watered garden. They've got 4 planting beds. The beds are 3.5 foot apart, or 3.5 foot width, or 42 inches, and the paths are 18 inches, and then centimeters is 110 or 40. So in the handbook, it shows how to lay this out, but it looks really visually stunning when you do it. So here's a well-watered garden in Birmingham, Alabama, near me, that somebody that we trained put in. Here's another one that we put in upstate New York. Here's another one that a student of ours put in Connecticut. Here's some that some people are putting in Indiana. Here's a well-watered flower garden by a friend of mine, CP, in Pennsylvania, which is amazing because his neighborhood liked this one a whole lot more than they did the vegetables even. And it was even like fulfilled the purpose of connecting with people in an amazing way. So this may be something you want to do. Here's one of our students that, or actually, I think she was trained by one of our students who was putting in one at their new farm in Ohio. Here's one in our community that we put in. Another lady, Karina, put this one in Toronto, Canada. And this one, she never came to a training or anything. They just read the manual and did it. So you guys that are listening, y'all are getting be able to download the manual if you want, and getting a little bit of an input from me. But even if there's a lot of people who have done this very successfully just by reading it and applying it. So you don't have to come to a training. She's come to one since then, but yeah. So I really feel like our focus right now in the well-watered garden as a tool for teaching people how to grow food for themselves, how to teach other people to do that, and how to teach people, well, to showcase as they're doing it the heart of Christ, is an important thing right now in this day and age where we have so much uncertainty about food supplies and stuff in the future. I want to see the church equipped to have the answers, the church equipped to share hope, the church not just in the same boat as everybody else is in, but that we have this amazing, passionate, journey that we're on that's based not despite us being a Christian, but because we love Jesus. And because a lot of Christians in some circles have a reputation of not really caring about stewardship and stuff. It's interesting. It's so fun to be able to share how we're caring about the land here because we love God, not just because we care, we worship the earth, or we don't just think that it's ours to use up. But I want to equip the church to be the ones with the answer. So that's why we do the 5-day in-depth training for trainers, where we have people come. Thank Cora, who you are on here, and making compost piles and stuff. And that's been our main thing we've done, as well as the Redeeming the Dirt Academy. Just to be able to leverage some of the information that we have that, we won't be able to go into everything on here as we go through this material, but you'll have this, if you're part of Redeeming the Dirt Academy, you don't have to be, but it's free if you want to be. Then a lot of the questions that you might have about specifics or those kind of things, is a resource for ongoing mentorship for people that we're training. And I just say, the food systems in the world right now are unstable. People will be looking for answers. And I think the church has an opportunity to offer practical solutions that point back to Jesus. So I just say, in conclusion, when we allow our farming to be an overflow of our faith, it can produce practical solutions and eternal impact. All right. Done with that. Well, thank y'all so much for sitting through that. I hope that was helpful to get a little bit of the bigger picture vision of the heart behind what we're going to talk about. So when we talk about how to plant seeds or how to do these other things, you understand that this is the vision. This is the motive behind doing this. And you can get all the technical things right, but if we don't have that heart of humility, if we're not committed to faithfulness with the little, if we're not here to serve others and we're fear-based and it's all about us and preserving us, then it's not going to have an impact. You know, God's looking for disciples that are worth multiplying, even in the way that we garden. And so that's where that's why what I'm going to focus on during these sessions is not so much in helping you get everything technically accurately perfect, but in helping you to understand the heart that you need to approach this with, because you can mess up the technical stuff. And if you have that heart of Jesus, people will see that and God will still use. In fact, God tends to use us more in our foolishness. I'm trying to show you this garden thing. It didn't work like I thought, but here it is. You know, I want to, I'm on the journey too, learning. People sometimes appreciate more the vulnerability than that you have everything figured out. and because it's God in us, not us, that's really going to have the impact on other people. So thank y'all so much for sitting through this first session. And we are out of time, but we'll try to we'll be back on here in a little less than 2 hours for the next session to talk some more. I just heard that it's supper time here. If you have particular questions, I'm sorry we didn't have time for those in this session, but we're on the Academy. Share in the event space or emailing me, try to answer some of those, and hopefully we'll get to some in the next session. So have a great evening if you're not going to join us for any of the other ones, and we will see y'all in a bit. God bless.